Reactive training systems.
I think part of gaining mastery is figuring out how to manage those things and make it work to your advantage. I've certainly had sets and sessions where a slightly wider squat stance just feels a little bit better, or toes a little bit more forward or a little bit further out, or subtle shifts to the way that you root your foot, or things like that make a difference. But I don't need to be overly attached to it. I think that's a good place to get to. And there's not really a shortcut to it either. You get there with time and experience. You haven't done enough repetitions.
Knowing when it feels bad, like the moment you squat or deadlift and you're like, this doesn't feel good at this moment. Having the confidence to manipulate little tweaks like that, foot placement, hand placement in the lifts, definitely hard to lead athletes down that road to be okay with that when they really look to coaches like, what is the right answer for my lift for all the time?
What observations do you make that might signal one thing or another? I can tell you that for myself, I pay attention to the RPE, the bar speed. Bar speed is a really good indicator. Things like this are necessarily nuanced. So you've got to be careful not to let a bar speed on a warm-up dictate your technique on a max lift. Those things are different, and optimizing for light weights is not the same as optimizing for heavy weights. So there's some subtle differences to things like that, but generally speaking, like if your top set and make some tweak to it and it moves better, trust that indicator. We could talk about round back deadlifting and its relative injury risk or non-risk. I tend to think that with any sort of mechanical system, the body's not merely a mechanical system. On some level, it shares a lot of similarities to that model. And if you push it to its adaptive limit, something is going to give, and it's probably going to be the thing that is the recipient of the greatest amount of stress. So I think that's something to think about too, right? Like there's a reason why you end up with knee, hip, low back injuries in the squat and not like ankle, foot injuries in the squat, right? And that's not to say that you shouldn't ram back deadlifts. I have plenty of athletes that do it. It's more like you should go into it with your eyes open and know this isn't, I don't want to phrase it too dramatically, just that, hey, this is the area that you're placing more strain on, and we should be mindful of the loading there.
Yeah, I think it is important to pay attention to what part is stressed, especially when it occurs abruptly. That might be another thing that I'd look at when considering, like, is this something that you have self-selected into because it is good for you, or we have a real big deficit in how strong your glutes are, and this is just leading to severely rounded back, and you've got no coordination here, and you can rep out 175 kilos on deadlift for 10 reps, and we throw on 185 kilos, and suddenly you get one, maybe two. That is the limiter. That is something that we need to pay attention to, especially if your form is changing really significantly when we add the load or when we add this extra rep or this extra RPE.
What kinds of things are you paying attention to? What do you notice when you have an athlete that does show some technique? I don't know how you would term it, like technique breakdowns that are sensitive to changes in.
I can think of one example that I saw from a lifter who they sent me a squat, and it was intended to be a pause squat, and they had pretty brief pauses at the bottom, and they went through their first 3 reps of this set of 4, and it was pretty much fine. But then we got to the 4th rep, and they told me that it was a misgroove, but I could see each rep as they leave the hold, their back starts to really round, and this bar is rolling way up on their back, and they're getting like pitched forward out of the hole. I'd feel uncomfortable doing this lift, and it gets really pronounced on rep 4, and suddenly the RPE spikes from 6 to 8.5, and they're like fighting to finish this rep. And so I'm looking for something where it's this pattern that, okay, like if we look close, it is there early on, but as soon as we cross this certain threshold, we now see a drastic increase in how this pattern is displayed. that leads to a surprise for the lifter. This is way harder than I thought it would be, or this made me really sore as a result. That type of thing is often what I see as like a clue to potentially change something.
Being able to do lots of reps with 175, but then you go to 185 and your rep capacity drops significantly. Is that an indicator in itself that you would be looking for some of these kind of uncharacteristic weak links in the chain kind of?
I think the numbers by themselves, maybe not, because I could see there being alternate explanations. Something truly did go wrong. You set up weird, or your spotter touched it, and something else happened during the set. Like, there are those considerations too. But I think it's when that type of drop off or dramatic increase in difficulty is accompanied by a visual deviation from their intended form.
The drop off in strength, it's often seen when a muscle group is doing the job of two muscles. You say rounded back in the squat. Well, your back is rounding to compensate for someone in a group project not showing up. And so as you increase load or reps, it's almost like an exponential difficulty increase on that muscle group until they can't take it. And the lifter doesn't really feel it.
We have in velocities too, if you're looking at isolation movements, that you take something like a bench press or a squat and you do multiple reps to, let's say, to a maximum effort set of 10. You'll see the bar speeds gradually slow. First couple reps are quite fast, and then they gradually slow into maximum. But if you were to do the same test with something like bicep curls, some isolation movement, my observation has been that there's less of a drop off. It's like same until it dies. It's just an interesting phenomenon that you can take something like a bench press or a squat, and there's a measurable difference in bar speed from like 4 or 5 reps in reserve down to 0 reps in reserve. And it's reliable. And you could use that then to say with a pretty good degree of reliability, okay, this is RPE 5 reps in reserve. And I can say that confidently versus with something like a front squat that has basically all the reps are the same until you get to like 8.5, 9 RPE. So being able to tell the difference at like a 6 or 7 RPE is not obvious. And that's more obvious when it's like between lifts like that. But I think about that when it comes to inter-individual differences too. And like we talked, but like when we talk about lower and programming 5 RPEs or 4 RPEs, like for me personally, I go like, what is that even? Like, how would you even begin to tell? And I think I can make a case for that, but I could see the argument as well that that could be like an inter-individual thing too. Perhaps you have somebody that's just generally more explosive. It would make sense that they would have a larger range through which to drop velocity. Or if you have somebody where kind of everything is moving at the same speed, your ability to distinguish low RPEs is going to be much more difficult.
Yeah, low RPE is always a struggle. Do you think that someone with a faster, more explosive profile will have a greater range to drop off? Have you noticed in some cases where they rapidly accelerate in terms of where that drop off is, where it's like, okay, all of their RPE 3 and RPE 5 and RPE 7, they're all the same speed. And then as soon as they hit like just a little bit above that, suddenly we're at like, oh, wow, that was actually really slow. And the gradient sped up drastically.
I've noticed that. Like that's the description of what my front squat is like, that pretty much everything is running around the same speed until I get to 8.5 RPE. And then it starts to slow down. I mean, it begs the question for me, like I may do a set and perceive it to be 6 RPE or something like that. Lots of times it's based on the bar speed, the last rep velocity. What perception is leading to that assessment?
Yeah, I actually thought of another question while you were talking, because it's like this awareness of your body, what you're doing in space, and how this is going to show up as you try to complete the movement. We've all probably worked with people that just get it. They have really high like athlete IQs, You're like, oh, go ahead and try this. There's this one cue, and they're like, actually, I already got it. No need. I figured this out, and I'm moving how you want me to. That's great. That's super cool. Then there's the other end of the spectrum where it's like, okay, we've tried these 78 cues, and none of this explanation is quite clicking. Maybe like if we were hands-on in person, we could try to move you through this like movement pattern and have you get it that way. But a lot of the times you remote coaching, and so that opportunity is very limited. What do you do in some of those cases? Like, have you found successful strategies or successful movements that maybe get things to just like click for somebody that may not have like as high of an athlete IQ, so to speak?
I will really far deviate away from specificity when I just want them to feel the muscles or go through the range of motion, and I will restrict everything else until they either feel the muscle feedback. Like, I will use engage your lats because that's a really common one. How do I get them to feel their lats? I will have them pick up a barbell and I'll just have them pull it against their hips until they feel the back burning. And I will say, that is the muscle I want you to connect with. And then I'll have them go back and forth. And if they are moving in a certain way, I will add a restriction or make it worse. So if I have someone whose bar drifts away from them in Olympic lifting, I will tie bands to a rig, put a bar in their hands. So the bands are pulling the bar out of their hands in the direction that they're going. So they have to overcompensate by pulling even farther in the direction I want them to go. And then they'll start to connect with the correct movement. I think Jacob mentioned that if you make their problem worse, they actually do better at compensating for it and can correct it a lot easier than if you try and mitigate the problem. So you exacerbate it, and then they'll cue in on the reaction to it.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of similar things. Think about tempo being a good lever to pull in an online space. I suppose that's going to work for people who have more minor problems and more average athletic abilities, I guess, because if you just slow them down enough, they can feel where the balance points are and feel what they need to engage and things like that. But that also tends to be like a demographic that I work with a lot. I was working with people who were true barbell novices. I would probably need to be more creative than just slowing things down, right? Just because the act of slowing it down, it gives you more time to perceive things, but it also increases the amount of fatigue that you accumulate in each rep. You just get a little bit more tired for each rep that you do. So you're looking for efficiencies just naturally. You're trying to find positions that make this feel a little bit easier. Doing rep work in gear is awful. No one likes it, but I think it's a really useful training tool. Powerlifters don't like rep work in general, but I'm talking about even just, and if you've never dabbled with it before, it's worse than it sounds. But the act of doing that rep work, you're more fatigued on the last reps, plus you've got the first several reps to inform your position and help you refine some of your technical positioning. For equipped lifting, a lot of it is being able to find a touch or being able to allow yourself to reach legal depth in squat. So doing some rep work helps you to learn how to relax the right way, even with a very heavy weight in your hands or on your back, so that you can better execute. So it helps with the skill. And speaking of equipped stuff, we've been talking about giving people space to be an athlete and figure out for themselves which technical details they need to manage and how to manage them. Anytime you have a technical thing that you're trying to make more lasting changes with, I think that's got to be a factor. I talk a lot about presenting a technical challenge, but it's got to be a challenge that the lifter can meet and succeed at ultimately. And that's on the coach to provide that challenge for them. Like, you've got to give them something that is difficult, but ultimately that they can succeed with. So then you can build on that success. You can't just say, load the world record. Oh, you missed it. Try again next week. You've got to build up to it.
Hey, let me tell you something that I know about you. Your lifting is important to you. It's probably one of your biggest priorities. And for people like us, Nothing compares to the feeling that you get when you set a new PR. That feeling of being the best that you've ever been, of doing something that you've never done before. This is what we're all after, and it's also what RTS specializes in. Getting you the absolute best program possible so that you can hit new PRs and reach your goals. We call it radically individualized training, and we're really good at it. Whether we need to account for busy schedules or equipment limitations, or precisely turn the dials and get the details of the program just right, we have the tools and the experience to guide your lifting to the next level. To us, coaching is all about leadership, relationship, and creative problem solving. A coach should be poised to help you make tough decisions about training and competing so that you can continually grow in your development. And of course, a coach should be a first-rate problem solver, especially when it comes to your training, technique, and strategy. Now, all this has to be built off of a really strong, professional coaching relationship that emphasizes trust and respect. Additionally, RTS coaches are not on an island. We have a strong network of professionals to reach out to, so if you find yourself in need of some specific expertise, say in the realm of nutrition or injury management or sports psychology, there's a deep expertise available there too. For more information, go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on coaching. That's store.reactivetrainingsystems.com, then click on coaching. Hope to see you on the team soon.